I, Margaret Hayes, 65 years old, once thought my family was at peace after my son got married. But then secrets from my daughter-in-law Rachel's past slowly came to light. Money secretly transferred away, an old name hidden, a childhood marked by orphanhood and abuse. I doubted her, judged her, and nearly became the harsh mother-in-law I had once feared. Yet through every trial, from tense misunderstandings to our grandchild's illness, and even the legal shadows cast by Rachel's biological father, we learned how to stand together. I witnessed my daughter-in-law rise with resilience, turning pain into light to help other women. Today, I want to share with you a journey where happiness does not come from perfection, but from love, forgiveness, and trust. For the true treasure of life is family. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd be so happy to connect with you. I am 65 years old, and sometimes even I am surprised that this house still holds so much laughter. 5 years ago, when Michael brought his wife and little Lucy to live with us, I thought it would be hard to adjust. But every morning, waking up to the sound of my granddaughter's tiny footsteps running down the hallway, I feel lucky. At this age, not everyone still has a home to hold on to. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, is capable and skillful. She knows how to arrange everything in the house, from meals to Lucy's schooling. Outsiders can only admire. Mrs. Hayes is truly fortunate to have such a gentle and talented daughter-in-law. I often smile and nod, but in my heart there lingers something I cannot quite name. Rachel treats me kindly, yet between us there's always a thin veil. She rarely shares, rarely lets me truly step into her world. And perhaps it is that very distance that makes me feel she is hiding something. One afternoon, I walked in from the garden to the kitchen. Rachel was sitting in front of her laptop, face intent, fingers typing quickly. When she heard the door, she startled slightly, closing the screen at once. I only managed to glimpse the words "transaction successful" flashing before disappearing. "Mother, is that you?" Rachel smiled, her voice a little strained. I nodded, stepped over to brew some tea, and tried to appear unconcerned. But the instincts from my years as a treasurer made it hard to forget that small detail. That evening, we had dinner as usual. Lucy chattered happily about the bluebird her teacher had drawn on the board. Michael nodded along while eating, and Rachel added food to my plate. "Mother, please try the grilled fish I made today, see if it suits your taste." I tried it, praised the flavor, and the meal passed in laughter. No one knew that in my heart, the image from the afternoon still lingered. Late at night, walking down the hallway to my room, I heard Rachel's voice drifting from the living room. Her tone was soft, almost trembling. "I'll send the full amount. Please don't worry. Just a little more time." I froze, my hand halting on the stair rail. The words cut off as if she had sensed a sound. I quickly moved on, pretending not to have heard. But inside me, those words drilled in like a seed of doubt. Who was Rachel speaking to? Who did she owe? And why did she have to hide it? I couldn't answer, nor did I dare ask right away. Perhaps everyone has hidden corners of their lives. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. From this day forward, I would keep a closer eye on my daughter-in-law, not because I didn't trust her, but because I felt the story inside this house was not as simple as its calm appearance. I returned to my room, yet Rachel's words echoed again and again in my head. "I'll pay in full. Please rest assured, Mother." Which mother? Who was on the other end of that call? And what did pay in full mean? A debt? A favor? Or something else she had never shared with the family? I tossed and turned restlessly on the old wooden bed. The nightlight shone down on my husband's framed photo on the shelf. Like a reminder, all these years I had lived upright, never hiding anything. And yet now, in my very own home, I felt there was a door closed tightly, one I was not allowed to open. The next day, I paid closer attention. When Rachel went shopping, she paid for the groceries with her own card, never touching the joint account she shared with Michael. Sometimes she received strange messages, then quickly turned off the screen. In front of Lucy and Michael, she kept her cheerful, attentive demeanor. But I, a woman who had lived more than half her life, could see the tension hidden behind that smile. One afternoon, while Lucy was busy drawing in the living room, I stood at the sink washing dishes. From the corner of the doorway, I saw Rachel sitting at the dining table, eyes fixed on her phone, typing a few lines. Then she sighed and brushed her hair back. I only managed to catch a glimpse of the words flashing across the screen. Transaction successful. My heart tightened. Could it be true? Was she really hiding something? That evening, when Michael came home late from the construction site, Rachel had already prepared dinner. Lucy giggled as she shared stories from school, while Rachel asked me, "Are you tired, Mother? Let me pour you more tea." I nodded, accepted the steaming cup, but in my mind, a single thought kept repeating. How could she act so natural, when behind it all was a secret? Night fell, and once again I couldn't sleep. From the living room below, Rachel's voice floated up. She spoke softly, urgently, as if afraid someone might overhear. "I've kept my word. I won't let anyone down. Please don't worry." I held my breath on the staircase, my heart pounding. This was clearly no ordinary phone call. These were words laced with fear and pressure. The more I listened, the more a storm of emotions swirled inside me. Worry, confusion, and even anger. Why didn't she trust me? Why choose secrecy, here in the very home I had opened wide to her? I returned to my room, closing the door tightly. In the mirror, my aging face reflected back uncertainty. I thought of Lucy, my innocent granddaughter, always believing her mother was perfect. I thought of Michael, my son, busy as ever, convinced his little family was peaceful. And then I thought of myself, the only one who could see the cracks beginning to form. From that night on, I began to watch in silence. I noted the transaction slips left on the kitchen counter, memorized the numbers scribbled on scraps Rachel carelessly discarded. I listened to the midnight calls, catching only fragments of words, yet enough to fuel an ever-growing storm of suspicion. On the surface, life remained the same. Lucy's laughter at dinner, the smell of Rachel's morning coffee, Michael taking the family to the supermarket on weekends. But inside me, one question grew sharper each day, spreading like ink on paper. What is Rachel hiding? I didn't know yet, but I was certain that with just a little patience, the answer would reveal itself. I could no longer endure the vague feeling that kept growing inside me. Every day, watching Rachel move around the house, managing everything with care, yet as if carrying a secret burden, I felt as though I were living with someone I had never truly understood. One morning, after Michael had gone to work and Lucy to school, I decided to confront her directly. Rachel was washing dishes, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, glinting on the drops of water on her hands. I cleared my throat. "Rachel, there's something I want to ask you directly." She paused slightly, then set the plate down and turned to face me, her eyes calm, yet guarded. "I've noticed you've had many transactions lately, and those late-night calls. Are you hiding something?" Rachel gripped the dish towel tightly, her lips pressed together. After a long silence, she answered softly, "That's personal. I can't explain." Her words were gentle, but they cut me like a blade. I sat down, forcing my voice to remain steady. "My dear, we are family. Everything in this house is bound together. How can there be such a thing as personal?" Rachel lowered her gaze, saying nothing more. In that moment, the invisible wall between us seemed to grow thicker. When Michael came home, I told him about it. He shook his head and sighed. "Mother, you're overthinking. Rachel isn't that kind of person. It must be something small. Don't be suspicious anymore." I looked at my son, wanting to cry out that no, this wasn't small. But in his eyes I saw weariness and a blind trust in his wife. I swallowed my words, left only with the loneliness of feeling out of place in my own home. Another evening, While I was knitting in the living room, Lucy came running downstairs, holding a drawing of a funny little cat. She climbed onto my lap, coloring as she chattered. "Grandma, Mommy often goes to see a lady with white hair. She calls her Mother Green. I heard it. That lady lives far away, and it smells like a hospital there." I froze, the knitting needle halting mid-stitch. "Mother Green? Are you sure, Lucy?" "Yes, I heard it clearly. The other day Mommy even said, 'I'll come back. Don't worry, Mother.' But she told me not to tell Daddy." My heart pounded. A strange name. Another woman Rachel called Mother. Why hide it? And why tell Lucy not to mention it to Michael? I stroked my granddaughter's hair, forcing my voice to stay calm. "All right, sweetheart. Keep drawing. But don't tell anyone else about this, okay?" Lucy nodded innocently, continuing her coloring, unaware that she had just handed me another fragment of the hidden puzzle. Inside me, the pieces of suspicion began to fit together. The money transfers, the cryptic phone calls, and now a silver-haired woman named Mother Green. More and more, I was convinced that Rachel was living with a secret far larger than she let on. When Lucy ran upstairs, leaving me alone in the quiet living room, the name Mother Green echoed endlessly in my mind. A silver-haired woman, someone Rachel trusted enough to tell her daughter to keep secret. I tried to string the fragments together, but the more I thought, the more tangled they became. If she were a benefactor, why hide it? If it were something dubious, why use the word mother? In that moment, the darkest thought flashed through my mind. Could this be a scam? I remembered a distant relative, Aunt Ruth, who years ago had sent money faithfully to an old wartime friend. She believed he was gravely ill and needed medicine, and for years she cut corners to send money. Only when her savings were drained did she discover that the friend was an imposter. Aunt Ruth collapsed in despair, and her family fell apart under the weight of debt. That image still haunts me. I could not let such a tragedy repeat itself with Michael and Lucy. Each time the thought crossed my mind, my chest tightened. I began to watch Rachel more carefully, subtly, so she wouldn't notice. She still seemed the model wife, the devoted mother, leaving no flaw for anyone to point to. And yet, every time I saw her with the phone in her hand, I felt certain those whispered words weren't meant for anyone innocent. One evening, when Michael came home late and the skies opened with rain, Rachel put on her coat and headed for the door. "I'm going to pick up something for dinner," she said in her usual tone. But I noticed her handbag bulging with a thick envelope. I sat in my chair, watching her figure disappear into the downpour. Inside me, a decision hardened. I had to know the truth. A memory returned when I was young. Newly married into the Hayes family, my own mother-in-law had scrutinized every coin I spent. She suspected I was secretly sending money to my family, when in truth I only wanted to buy cloth for my impoverished sister. The feeling of being watched, of being misunderstood, cut so deeply that I wept. And now, here I was, doing the very same thing to Rachel. I asked myself, had I become the mother-in-law I once feared? But then Lucy's image rose in my mind, those innocent eyes, trusting her mother completely. If Rachel truly was entangled in something shady, Lucy would be the first to be hurt. That thought steeled my heart. I grabbed an old raincoat, pulled up the hood, and slipped outside, following the path Rachel had taken. The cold rain slapped my face. The wind whipped at my coat, but I didn't turn back. Raindrops glistened on the street under the dim yellow lamps, as though illuminating every step I took. Up ahead, Rachel's figure flickered in and out of the rain. Her pace hurried, her hand clutching the bag tightly. I kept my distance, heart pounding half with fear, half with anticipation. I didn't know what I would find, a heartbreaking truth, a shadowy relationship, or perhaps only a grave misunderstanding. But in that rainy evening, I made my choice. I would follow Rachel, and that step opened a door that would change our family forever. The rain stung my face with its icy lash, but I didn't stop. Rachel walked quickly, as if she wanted to avoid running into anyone she knew. She crossed two streets and turned into an old apartment block, its walls stained and balconies crowded with faded laundry. I hid behind a tree, my heart pounding wildly, like a stranger committing a crime in my own life. The door of a ground floor unit creaked open. An old woman with silver hair and a frail frame appeared. Rachel bowed slightly, a fleeting, hurried smile on her face. They exchanged a few brief words. Then Rachel pulled a thick envelope from her bag and held it out with both hands. I froze. The sight cut straight into me like a knife. All the doubts I had harbored, now laid bare before my eyes. My daughter-in-law was hiding from her husband, secretly giving money to another woman. A surge of anger rose in my chest, hot blood rushing to my face. I thought of Michael, my son, who trusted his wife completely. I thought of Lucy, innocent, always looking up at her mother with pride. If they knew this truth, would the family survive? My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, the rain blurring the screen. I raised it and snapped a few quick photos. Rachel at the apartment door, handing the envelope to the silver-haired woman. The images were blurred through the downpour, but clear enough to serve as proof in that moment. Part of me felt I was betraying my own family. A memory returned. Years ago, when I was newlywed, my own mother-in-law had accused me of secretly sending money to my family. She had shadowed my every step until she finally forced me to hand over my household ledger. The humiliation of that day had scarred me for life. And now, here I was, doing the very same thing to Rachel. But what was the difference? I asked myself. Did I not see it with my own eyes? Was Rachel not handing money to someone else? The answer was yes, and that truth left me no choice but to face it. Rachel glanced around suddenly, and I pressed myself deeper into the shadows. She embraced the old woman, said something I couldn't hear over the roar of the rain, and then they parted. Rachel pulled her coat tighter and hurried off in the opposite direction of home. I remained rooted to the spot, soaked to the bone. In my hand, the blurred photos evidence of a secret. But inside me was a strange emptiness, half anger, half fear. Anger at her deceit, fear that I might have stepped into something irreversible. Clutching the phone tightly, I stepped back into the rain, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. I returned home first, changed out of my wet clothes, and sat silently in the living room. The ticking of the clock echoed like knives in my ears. Then the door opened. Rachel came in, brushing raindrops from her hair, hanging her coat as though nothing had happened. The rain was heavy, she said with a smile, carrying a bag of groceries into the kitchen. I stopped by the supermarket for some greens. Lucy's been craving mustard soup lately. I looked at her, my heart pounding as if it would burst. Everything was pretense. She put the bag away, washed her hands, and called me to the table as though life were perfectly normal. During dinner, Michael came home, exhausted after a long day. Rachel picked food into his bowl, asked about his work, while Lucy chattered endlessly about school. Everything flowed smoothly, as if the scene I had witnessed outside had been nothing more than a dream. But Rachel's exaggerated calm only tightened the knot in my chest. I set my chopsticks down and looked straight at Michael. "Son, I have something to say." Michael raised his head, surprised. "What is it, Mother?" I glanced at Rachel, then back at him. "Your wife seems to be hiding things." I saw it with my own eyes. The table fell silent. Rachel froze, then gave a vague smile, bowing her head as she placed more vegetables onto her daughter's plate. Michael frowned. "Mother, don't interfere in our marriage. My wife hasn't done anything wrong." His words caught in my throat like a stone. I wanted to shout that I had proof, that I had seen Rachel hand an envelope to another woman. But looking at Michael's weary eyes, I only sighed, lifted my glass of water, and forced myself to swallow my anger. Dinner ended under a heavy cloud. Lucy, oblivious, doodled cheerfully on a napkin. Rachel cleared the table with a smile, though her eyes avoided mine, and Michael sat in silence, as if raising a wall between me and his little family. That night, I lay awake, unable to sleep. The images replayed endlessly. Rachel in the rain, the envelope passed over, her wary gaze, her trembling hand clutching the old woman's fingers. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the hurried photos I had taken. Blurry, indistinct but still enough to confirm what I had seen. I felt as though I were clutching a stone, too heavy to hold, yet impossible to throw away. Just as I was drifting into uneasy slumber, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen. Rachel is not who you think she is. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Who had sent it? A neighbor? Someone who knew the secret? Or was it the hand of a stranger intent on driving my family into ruin? I stared at the dark screen, my hand trembling. The seed of doubt had been sown, and I knew the true storm had only just begun. Ever since that anonymous message, my heart felt as though it had fallen into a dark pit. The fragments I had witnessed began piecing themselves together in the most terrifying way. Rachel's secretive calls, the envelope handed over in the rain, and now a stranger insisting she is not who I think. Two possibilities rang in my mind, either an affair or some shady involvement with money. Both could destroy this family. Outwardly, I kept silent, but I couldn't stop the suspicious glances whenever I looked at Rachel. She pretended nothing was wrong, cooking, cleaning, smiling with Lucy. Yet the invisible distance between us had now solidified into a wall. Every meal turned into a battlefield of silence. Michael would share a few words about work. Lucy would chatter about school, while Rachel and I avoided each other's eyes. Even when reaching for food, we carefully avoided letting our chopsticks touch, as though the slightest contact might spark an explosion. Michael seemed to notice but chose silence. My son had never been good at standing between the two women in his life. He saw it. He knew something was wrong, but pretended that by not mentioning it, the storm would pass. One evening, Lucy sat beside me, her wide eyes fixed on my face. She whispered, "Grandma, why don't you and Mommy talk anymore?" I froze. She was only 8 years old. How could she understand the undercurrents of adult life? I forced a smile, stroking her hair. "It's nothing, Lucy. Grandma is just a little tired." But she shook her head, worry clouding her eyes. "No, that's not it. I see you don't smile at Mommy. I'm scared. Like in the movies, when parents fight, and then they leave each other." Her words squeezed my heart tight. In an instant, I saw myself at 10 years old, sitting in a corner, watching my parents argue, then watching my mother wipe her tears and walk away. That old wound throbbed again. I didn't want Lucy to grow up with that same fear. But how could I reassure her when even I wasn't sure how long this family could hold together? I hugged Lucy close and whispered, "Your family won't fall apart. Sometimes grown-ups have things they can't easily explain, but I promise you'll always have Grandma by your side." She nodded and buried her face against my shoulder, and I looked toward the kitchen, where Rachel was washing dishes, her back silent and distant. In the dim yellow light, her figure felt both familiar and strange. I asked myself, what exactly is Rachel hiding? And have I been too harsh, turning every suspicion into a verdict in my mind? But then, the image of that envelope in the rain returned along with the anonymous message. The doubt had already taken root, and I knew, whether I wanted it or not, it would keep growing until one day the truth was finally revealed. Lately, Michael had been home less and less. Whenever he sensed the icy atmosphere between Rachel and me, he found excuses to stay longer at the construction site or go out for beers with colleagues. I knew my son wasn't heartless, only afraid of facing conflict. But that only deepened my loneliness, as if this entire house had become nothing more than a silent battlefield between me and Rachel, neither of us willing to step aside. The name Lucy had blurted out, Mother Green, haunted me more and more. A silver-haired woman. Who was she? Why did Rachel call her mother? And why keep her hidden from Michael? I began searching for answers. I asked a few old acquaintances in town, pretending it was mere curiosity. I sifted through the church's community records, hoping the name Green would appear. But the town wasn't small, and Greens were many. I had no way of knowing which one was hers at night, when sleep wouldn't come. I sat at the computer and typed Mrs. Green plus Pennsylvania into the search bar. Hundreds of names popped up, all strangers. I felt like a stalker, yet I justified it to myself. I was doing this to protect my family. I couldn't sit idly by while my son and granddaughter lived inside a circle of secrets I wasn't allowed into. And through it all, the memory of Aunt Ruth returned again and again. I remembered her pale face the day she discovered her life savings had vanished lost. Because she had trusted the wrong person. She sat collapsed on the floor, clutching the empty wooden box, whispering over and over, "I only wanted to help. I only wanted to help." That scene etched itself into me, leaving behind an unshakable fear. Now, I was terrified Rachel might be walking that same path or worse, that she herself was leading my family into it. One afternoon, as I stood on the porch, my neighbor Mrs. Cooper came by. She was notorious for nosing into other people's business, often to the point of irritation. But this time, I didn't brush her off. "Mrs. Hayes," she lowered her voice, "I don't mean to intrude, but I once saw your Rachel sobbing outside an apartment door, and I recognized the place it belonged to, an old silver-haired lady people call Mrs. Green." I froze. Mrs. Cooper's words poured oil onto the flames of my suspicion. Crying outside a stranger's door and hiding it from the family, what could that mean? I glanced toward the kitchen, where Rachel was bent over the counter, preparing dinner. The evening sun lit her face, gentle, diligent, the picture of a devoted wife and mother. Yet in my mind, Mrs. Cooper's words echoed louder than the sound of chopping and clattering dishes. I knew then it was time for me to find Mrs. Green myself, because only there could I uncover the truth. I never imagined that, at this age, I would become someone who follows others in secret. Yet every step Rachel took, every midnight call, every envelope she carried, it all felt like a rope pulling me forward, not allowing me to stand still. One afternoon, I decided to go further. Rachel left the house with her familiar handbag, and I followed at a distance far enough to remain unseen. The street led once again to that old apartment block, its paling walls standing like witnesses to stories best left untold. Rachel knocked on the ground floor door. I hid behind a bush, my heart racing. The door cracked open, and I heard her voice shaky, but filled with gratitude. "I'm so grateful to you, Mother. You're the one who saved my life." I froze. My ears rang, unable to catch the rest. "Saved my life?" The words cut me open, wounding and soothing at the same time. They sparked countless possibilities. Perhaps Rachel was repaying a benefactor, or perhaps it was just a convenient excuse for those mysterious payments. I stepped back, nearly stumbling on a stone beneath my feet, my mind tangled in knots. If Mrs. Green was truly her savior, why couldn't Rachel tell us? If it was innocent, why all the secrecy? Yet that phrase, "saved my life," kept me from condemning her outright. That evening, dinner was once again quiet. Lucy chattered on about school, while Rachel forced a faint smile, her face weary. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. I watched closely, seeing clearly the weight pressing down on her thin shoulders. At last, Michael noticed too. He set down his chopsticks and looked at his wife. "What's wrong? You haven't been sleeping well lately. Is something going on?" Rachel quickly smiled and brushed it off. "No, it's just too much work. That's all." But I saw her hand rest lightly on Michael's, shaky, almost pleading for him not to ask more. Michael frowned, fell silent. Yet in his eyes flickered something new, suspicion for the very first time since all of this began. I sat there, torn between speaking and staying silent. If I told him that I had heard Rachel call Mrs. Green the one who saved my life, how would he react? Would he believe me, or think I was inventing things just to divide them? In that thick silence, an old memory returned. When Michael was 10, I once discovered he had hidden a wound on his knee for days. He hadn't dared tell me, afraid of being scolded. He limped through school for a whole week until I noticed the blood seeping through his trousers. My heart shattered then. My son had endured pain alone, simply because he feared losing the image of being the good boy in my eyes. And now, perhaps Rachel was doing the same, hiding her suffering, hiding her truth, afraid of losing something far greater. But confusion didn't wash away my suspicion. On the contrary, it only deepened my hunger to know more. I realized this was merely the surface of a secret much deeper than I had ever imagined. That night, a light rain pattered outside the porch. I went down to the kitchen for some water and found Rachel still awake. She sat at the dining table, hunched over, her pen moving swiftly across a sheet of paper. Her dark hair fell loose and messy, her face etched with exhaustion. I hesitated on the staircase, not wanting to startle her, but then Lucy's voice called from upstairs. Rachel quickly folded the paper, tucked it under a book, and hurried off to her daughter's room. When she returned, the page was still there, half hidden beneath the cover. I stood frozen, torn between conscience and curiosity. Did I have the right to read it? But reason won out. If this secret threatened my family, I needed to know. My hands shook as I opened it. Rachel's handwriting was soft, but unsteady. I owe you my life. If it hadn't been for you, I would have died at 16. I promise I'll repay everything, though even a lifetime won't be enough. I bit down hard on my lip, my chest tightening. The words cut both ways, piercing me with pity, yet planting fresh doubt. Died at 16. What had Rachel endured? Who exactly was Mrs. Green in this story? A savior who pulled her back from the brink, or someone exploiting her gratitude to keep her bound? I folded the letter and slid it back into place, but my mind churned with questions. The next morning, after Rachel hurried Lucy off to school, I searched around the dining table again, as if hoping for another clue. In the small drawer underneath, I found an envelope. Inside wasn't money, but an old, worn photograph. In the picture stood a row of rusted iron beds, paint peeling from the walls. An orphanage. Among the thin, weary children, I recognized Rachel, her tiny face, her sad eyes, her shoulders drawn in. Beside her stood a silver-haired woman, her features gaunt but her gaze bright, a protective hand resting on Rachel's shoulder. I sank into a chair, my pulse racing. The photo answered some of my questions. Rachel had grown up in an orphanage, and this woman, Mother Green, must have been her only anchor in those harsh years. I was shaken. Rachel had never spoken of her childhood. Michael never mentioned it either. We had only known her as a dedicated teacher, a gentle wife, a devoted mother. But now, as the veil of her past slowly lifted, I realized I knew almost nothing of the woman living under my roof. A strange compassion stirred in me, yet suspicion refused to die. If Mrs. Green truly was a benefactor, then perhaps the money transfers were nothing more than repayment. But what if there was something more, something darker that Rachel couldn't reveal? I tucked the photo back into its envelope, my hands trembling. The letter and the photograph might be the key to understanding my daughter-in-law, or they might open a pit I dared not look into. I knew then it was time to meet Mrs. Green face to face, the woman who stood beside Rachel. In that photo, the woman Rachel called Mother. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The letter, the photograph, the hushed calls, all of it weighed on me, turning every meal and every glance with Rachel into a silent duel. I knew the time had come to confront her. One evening, while Michael was still at the site and Lucy at her art class, I sat waiting in the living room. Rachel came in, set down her bag, her face drawn and weary. I looked straight at her, wasting no words. Rachel, I read the letter you left behind. She flinched, stepping back half a pace, her hand trembling. You read it. I nodded, unflinching. You wrote you owe Mother Green your life, that without her, You would have died at 16. Rachel, can you explain this to me? I need to know the truth. In that moment, her calm facade shattered. Rachel buried her face in her hands and broke into sobs. Tears streamed onto the wooden floor, her choked cries cutting through me. It was a long time before she managed to speak, her voice trembling. I grew up in the orphanage. Mother Green was the only one who secretly cared for me. She slipped me food, gave me a safe place to sleep, shielded me from the beatings. I don't want to remember anymore. I sat frozen. Never once had Michael mentioned this past. To us, Rachel had only ever been a kind teacher, a devoted wife. But now, before me, was a woman who had survived hell without ever breathing a word. I lowered myself onto the couch beside her, though my hand hesitated, unsure whether to rest it on her shoulder. My daughter-in-law seemed so small, so wounded, so different from the strong figure she showed the world. Rachel wiped her tears, her voice hoarse. I want to repay her on my own. Mother Green is old now, struggling. I don't want Michael dragged into it. I don't want him to know my past. I'm afraid, if he knew, he'd look at me differently. Her words clenched my heart. I remembered being that woman once too afraid of judgment. When I first entered the Hayes family, every penny, every gesture scrutinized by my mother-in-law. I knew that feeling, yet part of me still burned with anger. Why hide this from Michael? Why push the family into suspicion, just to bury a past she didn't choose? Softly, I asked, do you think hiding it forever will help? Michael is your husband. He deserves to know the truth. Rachel shook her head, eyes swollen and red. No, I can't. He already bears too much pressure from work. I won't let my dirty past become his burden. I only want to quietly repay her, quietly live my role as wife and mother. I sighed, turning my face away, torn between compassion and frustration. The perfect family image I had clung to now seemed more fragile than ever. Then came the soft click of the door. Rachel and I both looked up. Michael stood in the doorway, his face pale, as though he had just overheard something he could never have imagined. What did you just say? You grew up in an orphanage? My son's voice cracked, disbelief hanging in the air. Rachel froze, terror flashing in her eyes. She turned away, her hands clasped so tightly they trembled. I looked at my son and saw the shock etched into every line of his face. He stepped forward as though the ground beneath him had collapsed. Why, after 5 years, why did you never tell me? I never knew. Rachel broke down, dropping to her knees, clutching her husband's legs. I was afraid, Michael, afraid that if you knew I was an orphan, that I'd suffered abuse, you would never see me the same way again. I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted you to believe we were just an ordinary family. Michael stood frozen. He didn't push her away, but neither did he bend down to embrace her. I could see him trembling, torn between love and betrayal. And me. My heart suddenly softened. Every word Rachel sobbed, every tear that fell, reminded me of myself. I remembered my first day in the Hayes household. Every scrutinizing look from my mother-in-law piercing like needles. I too had been afraid, desperate to be accepted. And now Rachel was reliving that same fear, yet alongside compassion. Anger still smoldered within me. Anger that she had kept us in the dark. Anger that she had made me into a suspicious stranger in my own home. My voice came out heavy. Rachel, if you truly see us as family, you cannot leave us to live in the shadows like this. I can understand you, but I cannot accept the way you've hidden everything. Rachel lowered her head, tears dripping onto the floorboards. Michael stepped forward, gently lifting her to her feet, though confusion still clouded his eyes. Silence fell. Only the ticking clock and our ragged breaths filled the room. I was about to speak when a small envelope slipped from Rachel's bag, landing on the floor. All three of us turned to it. I bent down and picked it up. Inside, along with some worn papers, was a faded birth certificate. Under the dim yellow light, the words stood out clearly. Birth name, Rebecca Green. I went still. The name we had called her all these years, Rachel, was not her true name. I lifted my gaze to Rachel, my lips trembling. Your name. It was changed. She stayed silent, tears streaming, unable to look up, and in that instant, I knew this story was far from over. Rachel's past was not only one of abandonment, but of another identity, another name, a secret no one in this family had ever known. I still held the paper in my hand, the birth certificate yellowed with age, its corners frayed. The name Rebecca Green burned itself into my eyes. I looked up at Rachel, or was it Rebecca standing before me, trembling, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Rebecca Green, I repeated, my voice catching in my throat. So that's really your name? Rachel broke into tears, her face streaked and wet. She nodded, unable to deny it any longer. After a long moment, she drew a shaky breath and whispered, I changed my name to escape my father. He was an abuser. When I was little, he beat me, abandoned me in the orphanage. I survived on crumbs, on the pity of strangers. If it hadn't been for Mother Green, I wouldn't be alive today. Her words pierced me like a blade. All the things I had imagined, affairs, fraud, crime, were nothing but mist concealing a truth even more brutal. My daughter-in-law was not only an orphan, but a woman who had buried an entire identity under violence and fear. I remembered her wary eyes from the first days she entered this house. Whenever I asked about her family, she always deflected, smiling faintly and changing the subject. I had thought it was coldness. Only now did I realize it was the look of someone who had lived her life in terror of being exposed. Michael sat frozen, his face drained of color. He stared at his wife as though she were a stranger. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice both choked and edged with hurt. Why did you hide this from me for 5 years? 5 years living together, and you never once told me your real name, never once shared your past. I'm your husband, Rebecca. I deserved to know. Rachel lifted her tear-streaked face. I know, but I was afraid, Michael. Afraid that if you knew I was a discarded child, carrying the Green name and all its ugliness, you would despise me, leave me. I just wanted to be Rachel, a good wife, a good mother, so that you and Lucy could be proud of me. Michael clenched his fists, slamming them against the wooden table with a sharp crack. I can't believe this. All this time, you've lived under a false name, even on our marriage papers. I looked at my son, torn between sympathy and fear. He was in shock, but the anger in his voice could push everything to the edge. I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to steady him. Michael, listen. My daughter-in-law has endured too much pain, hiding her past. It may have been wrong, but it came from fear. You must understand that. Michael drew a deep breath, but his eyes were still clouded with turmoil. Rachel buried her face in her hands, her whole body trembling. The room thickened with heavy silence. The clock ticking as if marking the rhythm of a truth dragged into the light one that had waited too long. Rachel lifted her head, tears streaming, her shaking hands gripping the edge of the table. Her voice broke, every word pulled from a wound that had never healed. Because I wanted you to love me as Rachel, not as the child carrying that filthy surname. I didn't want to live forever under the shadow of a cruel father. I wanted a new start, to be seen for the woman I chose to become. Michael stood stunned, his face torn between pain and fury. He stepped back, as though even a few feet of distance could help him breathe. In his eyes, I saw betrayal, not because of her past suffering, but because his wife had chosen to keep it hidden all these years. And then, a small voice rose from the staircase. Mommy, you have another name? All three of us turned. Lucy stood there clutching her teddy bear, her wide eyes filled with confusion. None of us knew how long she had been listening, only that her lips trembled as though she couldn't understand why her gentle mother had another name. Rachel broke down, rushing to hold her daughter. Lucy, listen to me. I'm still your mom, no matter what my name is. I love you more than anything. But Lucy pulled back, looking up with innocent worry. Then, why did you change it? Is it because you didn't want me to know who you really are? The sight pierced me. An 8-year-old child could never understand the shattered pieces of her mother's past. But I couldn't blame her. Those clear little ears had heard what they shouldn't. And now doubt had seeped into her once innocent world. Michael couldn't take it anymore. He turned away, striding toward the door, his voice raw. I need air. I can't stay here right now. Michael, Rachel cried after him, her voice breaking, but the door slammed shut, leaving a cold emptiness in the room. I sat there, watching my daughter-in-law collapse to the floor, clutching her child as she wept. Lucy's tiny hands stroked her mother's back, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. In that moment, I saw my family like a shattered mirror, each fragment reflecting a painful truth. The past, the present, and the secrets still left unspoken. And Michael's figure disappearing into the rainy night felt like an omen. The storm had only just begun. That night, the house felt as though something vital had been lost. Michael left without saying when he would return. Rachel sat collapsed on the floor, clutching Lucy in her arms, her sobs dragging on. The child, exhausted, drifted to sleep against her mother's chest, though her lashes were still damp. I watched the scene, my heart a storm of tangled thoughts. When Lucy was finally asleep, Rachel laid her gently on the bed, then returned to sit across from me. Her eyes were swollen, her face drawn and hollow. She spoke softly, her voice trembling as though she had already surrendered. If I must, I'll leave. I don't want Michael or you to bear this burden anymore. Maybe this family would be more peaceful without me. Her words pierced me. For a moment, I saw myself more than 40 years ago, a young bride standing before her mother-in-law, accused of being unworthy of this family. I remembered that night clearly, packing my belongings in secret, ready to leave so my husband wouldn't be trapped between two women's war. I had once been the outsider, lacking lineage, lacking wealth. I had once heard words that made me feel small, humiliated. And now, my daughter-in-law sat before me, trembling, uttering nearly the same words. A strange feeling stirred in me, not anger or reproach, but a quiet, aching sympathy. I understood Rachel's fear, the fear of not being accepted, of being branded a stain on the family, of love not being strong enough to cover the scars of the past. I looked at her for a long while. She kept her gaze lowered, hands clenched tightly, as though bracing for my verdict. I sighed and spoke gently. You think leaving is the best way? Do you know what will happen to Michael and Lucy if you walk away? You've lived through a childhood of deprivation. Do you want Lucy to repeat that? Rachel lifted her tear-streaked face. But I'm afraid I'll ruin everything. I don't want to see Michael suffer because of my past. I shook my head slowly. My dear, pain doesn't come from the past, it comes from hiding it. It's silence that keeps the wound bleeding. As those words left my lips, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I no longer saw Rachel as a stranger to be exposed. Instead, I saw a young woman, fragile, trapped between love and the fear of abandonment, just as I had once been. That night, sleep never came. Rachel's muffled sobs, Lucy's bewildered eyes, and Michael's silhouette disappearing into the storm haunted me. I knew that waiting would never bring the truth in full, and I also knew this. If I didn't step out and seek answers myself, this family would soon collapse. The next morning, after Rachel took Lucy to school, I slipped on a thin coat, tucked the old photograph into my pocket, and set off for the rundown apartment building Rachel often visited. The chipped stairways, the narrow, dim corridors, the musty air, all of it reminded me of the poor housing blocks I used to visit as a treasurer, distributing aid money years ago. I knocked. After a pause, the door opened slightly, and there she was, the silver-haired woman from the photo. Her face was thin, her eyes deep yet startlingly bright. You are Mrs. Green? I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded, a flicker of caution in her gaze. I introduced myself, then gathered my courage. I'm Rachel's mother-in-law. I need to know the truth." Her eyes softened. She invited me into the small apartment. Inside, it was simple wilted potted plants on the windowsill, an old bookshelf, a frayed armchair. The air carried the faint scent of herbal tea. We sat down. Mrs. Green looked at me and sighed. "Rebecca, or Rachel, she's never told anyone everything. She's terrified, afraid that if people learn her past, she'll lose the last home she's ever found." The words jolted me. "The last home?" She nodded. "Yes, she grew up in violence, abandoned, beaten. By the time I found her, she was only a shadow of a child. I snuck her food, shielded her from the worst of it. When she grew older, she fled, changed her name, tried to start over. And when she married, when she had a child, she saw it as the only thing she truly had in life. She's afraid that if the truth comes out, it will all crumble." My chest tightened. In that moment, the anger I had carried dissolved, replaced by a raw ache. I remembered Rachel saying she was ready to leave, that she didn't want to burden us. Now I understood. She carried, always, the fear of losing the family she had finally built. I reached out and held Mrs. Green's frail hand. "I understand, but you also know, hiding forever will never keep a family whole." Mrs. Green nodded, her gaze drifting far away. "I've told her many times, but Rebecca is stubborn. She thinks if she keeps repaying me, living quietly, the past will stay buried. But no, wounds like hers don't sleep so easily." We sat in silence for a long while. Outside, rain pattered on the tin roof. The little room felt heavier, burdened by secrets unspoken. I rose at last, speaking softly. "Thank you for saving my daughter-in-law, but I must know, the money Rachel has been sending you, what is it truly for?" Mrs. Green stiffened. For a moment her eyes betrayed unease. She turned her face away, as though my question had touched the one last shadow she wasn't ready to unveil. And in that instant, I realized there was still one more secret left, and that secret would decide whether my family broke apart or found a way to heal. Mrs. Green sat quietly for a moment, her eyes drifting toward the window where rain trickled down the glass. Then she turned to me, speaking slowly, as though afraid each word might overwhelm me. "Rachel doesn't send money to me. She sends it to keep up a small scholarship fund for other orphans. She wants them to have a chance at education, so they don't have to relive the dark childhood she once endured." I was stunned. Her words struck like cold water against the burning doubts I had carried for months. So the envelopes of money, the late-night calls, the secretive visits, none of it was an affair. None of it a scam. It was all for something quietly good. My throat tightened, my hands clutching the strap of my bag to keep them from shaking. Day after day, I had thought ill of my daughter-in-law. I had put her on trial inside my mind, condemning her in silence. And yet, all along, she had simply been trying to extend the same thread of kindness that Mrs. Green once gave her. I lowered my head and sighed. "God, I've been so wrong about her." Mrs. Green smiled faintly, tinged with sorrow. "Rebecca is still afraid of judgment. She doesn't speak of it because she fears people will say she's showing off or meddling. She only wants to do the right thing quietly." Her words reminded me of my own past. When I worked as a school treasurer, once, I secretly used my own money to buy books for a poor student. When others found out, instead of praise, whispers spread that I only wanted to look virtuous. Kindness often carries the weight of warped opinions. Perhaps Rachel understood that better than anyone, and so she chose silence. On the way home, the rain had stopped, though puddles still gleamed along the street. I walked slowly, my heart heavy with both regret and relief. Regret for having doubted her, relief for finally uncovering the truth behind her secrecy. A truth that was tender, selfless, and made me feel small in comparison. When I arrived, I found Rachel sitting at the table, her eyes red, as if she had been crying again. I didn't go to her. I retreated quietly to my room. That night, when everyone was asleep, I took a slip of paper and wrote just 3 trembling words. I understand now. I placed the note on her dressing table. No explanations, no reproach. Just those 3 words, like a door creaking open after being locked for far too long. Back in my room, my heart raced. I didn't know how Rachel would react in the morning, but at least I wanted her to know that someone in this house had begun to believe, begun to understand, and perhaps begun to forgive. The next morning, I rose earlier than usual. Outside, the sky was clear after the night's rain, pale sunlight spilling into the kitchen. I sat with my tea, waiting for the sound of Rachel's footsteps. She appeared, her face drawn, her eyes still swollen. When she stepped into her room, I heard the faint rustle of paper, then a silence that seemed to stretch. A moment later, the door burst open. Rachel stood there, the note shaking in her hand. Tears spilled over, streaming down her cheeks. She came closer, dropped to her knees before my chair, and choked out, "Mother." "Mom," I froze. In 5 years of living together, this was the first time Rachel had called me mother. 2 simple syllables, yet they shattered the invisible wall that had stood between us for so long. I bent down, placed my hand on her shoulder, and felt a wave of pain and warmth rise together in my chest. Rachel wept, pressing her face into my palm. "I'm sorry. I hid the truth. I made you think the worst of me. But I was so afraid that if Michael knew, if you knew, I would lose this family." I pulled her into an embrace and whispered, "My dear, sometimes it's hiding that makes us lose what's most precious. But no more. From now on, I understand. I won't let you be alone again." And in that moment, I knew my heart had shifted. No more anger, no more suspicion, only a deep, enduring compassion. But Michael was different. When he returned that evening and saw Rachel clinging to me in the kitchen, her eyes swollen with tears, he simply stood still for a moment before letting out a long sigh. "Mom, I know you care for Rachel, but I still feel betrayed. We lived together for 5 years, and she never once told me the truth. How am I supposed to act like nothing happened?" Rachel trembled, wanting to step closer to her husband, but Michael pulled back. His eyes were torn. Love still lingered there, but trust had already cracked. I stood between them, feeling with certainty that this family was still teetering on the edge. That night, the air in the house grew heavy again. Rachel withdrew into the bedroom with Lucy, while Michael sat alone on the porch, quietly smoking, a habit he had long abandoned but now returned to. I watched him, wanting to offer comfort, but I knew no words could mend a wound of the heart so quickly. Only time, and whatever lay ahead, could provide the answer. And then, as if fate meant to test us, just days later Lucy suddenly fell ill. At first it was only a slight fever, but soon it turned into violent coughing, her small body trembling uncontrollably. Rachel, panicked and weeping, held her close. Michael rushed to carry her to the car. I followed behind, my heart sinking in that moment. All anger and suspicion dissolved. Only one truth remained. We had to hold on to Lucy together. It was Lucy's sudden illness that forced our broken family, no matter how fractured, to bind together, united against a single fear. The days in the hospital were the longest, heaviest I had endured since losing my husband. Lucy lay on the stark white bed, her face flushed with fever, her lips dry and cracked. The IV lines glittered under the fluorescent lights, squeezing my heart with every glance. Rachel never left her daughter's side. Through the nights, she clutched Lucy's hand, whispering prayers despite the ache in her back, despite the burning red in her sleepless eyes. The nurses urged her to rest, but Rachel only shook her head. "She needs me here." Michael stood in the corner, watching silently. I could see something shifting in his gaze, no longer only anger at being kept in the dark, but a deep stirring at the fierce love Rachel poured into their child. I knew that with each passing moment, her devotion was melting the ice around my son's heart. One evening, While Rachel dozed with her head on Lucy's bed, I drew Michael into the hallway. The hospital's cold light cast shadows on his tired, restless face. I took a deep breath and spoke softly. Michael, it's time I told you everything. The things you've never known about Rachel. He turned to me, his eyes torn between frustration and a desperate need for answers. You knew? All these years she kept it from me, did you know too? I shook my head, my voice lowering. No, I only found out recently, but I went to see Mrs. Green, and I understood why Rachel did what she did. I told him everything from the letter Rachel had left behind, to the photograph from the orphanage, to what Mrs. Green had revealed, that Rachel had been abused by her father, abandoned, raised in the orphanage, and saved only by Mrs. Green's kindness. That the money he had seen her hiding was never for some illicit affair, but to sustain a small scholarship fund for orphans so they could have the chance she had once longed for. Michael stayed silent the whole time. I saw his hands trembling, gripping the arm of the hallway bench. At last, he whispered, "My God, so all this time, she was only trying to do good, and she hid it, because she thought I couldn't accept her past?" I nodded. Yes, my daughter-in-law isn't perfect. She carries wounds and fears, but she chose silence because she wanted to protect the happiness she found. Her mistake was not believing you were strong enough to love her completely, past and present. Michael leaned back against the wall, his eyes squeezed shut. A single tear slid down his cheek. My son, the man who had always tried to be strong, finally let himself weep for his wife. And I knew, when he stepped back into that room and saw Rachel still holding their daughter's hand, that this truth would begin to heal the rift between them, even if storms still lay ahead. When we returned, Rachel was still at Lucy's bedside, her fingers wrapped tightly round the child's. Her eyelids drooped with exhaustion, her hair falling loose across her face, shadowing her weary eyes. Michael stopped at the doorway, watching his wife for a long time. Then, as if he could no longer hold back, Michael stepped forward and knelt beside the hospital bed. His voice was hoarse, trembling. "I was wrong. I was wrong to doubt you, Rachel. I should have trusted you, no matter what your past was. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Rachel lifted her tearful eyes. In that instant, the hard shell around her shattered. With a sob, she collapsed into her husband's arms. They held each other tightly, weeping as though years of secrets, anger, and suspicion had finally found release. I sat nearby, tears streaming down my own cheeks. How long had it been since I believed this family could sit together again like this? And now, in this sterile room, heavy with disinfectant, I saw forgiveness blooming in the very tears they shed. Rachel's voice broke. "I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid my past would make you despise me. So I hid it. I was wrong." Michael gripped her shoulders, shaking his head. "No, you were wrong only in thinking I could love just a name. I love you, Rachel, Rebecca, whatever name you carry. I love the woman who gave me this child, the woman sitting here fighting for her, for this family." His words made my heart tremble. I had longed to hear my son speak them, not for me, but for the woman who had stood beside him, bearing so many fears. And now, at last, he had. The room fell into a quiet hush, broken only by muffled sobs. Then a small, gentle voice rose, shattering the silence. "Mommy, Daddy, please don't fight anymore." We all turned at once. Lucy's eyes had fluttered open, her cheeks still flushed with fever, but a bright, innocent smile spread across her face. She looked at her parents, then at me, and spoke with childlike certainty. "Grandma and Mommy are both my family." Her words stilled us. For a moment, every anger, every doubt, every fear dissolved into nothing. I raised a trembling hand to my lips, my heart softening. Michael and Rachel gazed at each other, their eyes swollen with tears but lit by a new, tender light. It was Lucy's innocent words, those of an 8-year-old, that drew us all back to the beginning. Not the past, not the secrets, but the love and the home we still shared. We thought that after the days in the hospital, after Michael and Rachel finally held hands through tears, the storm would calm. But life is rarely that simple. One afternoon, just after bringing Lucy home from her treatment, a strange man appeared at our door. He was tall, worn-looking, his face lined with time. In his hand he carried a stack of old papers. His voice rough. "I'm here for Rebecca Green." Rachel froze. Her old name cut through the fragile piece like a knife. Michael stiffened, while I instinctively stepped forward, shielding her. "I'm her mother-in-law," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What do you want?" The man glanced at me, then fixed his gaze on Rachel. Her father, before he died, left an unpaid debt. "Here are the papers. She's the legal heir. She must pay." Rachel shook, her lips paling. "No, that's not my debt. I never. But I looked at the documents in his hand, the cold numbers, the faded signatures, and I knew. Right or wrong no longer mattered. People would cling to the law, to the birth name, dragging Rachel back into the mire she had spent her life fleeing. I stepped forward, standing squarely between them. My voice rang out, firmer than I thought myself capable of. "She is not alone. If there is any debt to settle, then we the family will face it together." Rachel lifted her tear-filled eyes to me, as though she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Michael moved beside me, his voice short and resolute. "Yes, this is my wife. If it must be paid, my mother and I will pay it." The man looked startled, perhaps not expecting such a strong response. He only nodded, left the papers, and walked away without another word. As the door closed, Rachel collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "Why? Why did you do that? This isn't your fault, or Michael's. It's my filthy past. I should bear it alone." I knelt before her, grasping her cold hands. "No, Rachel. Your past is part of this family too. You've carried it alone long enough. From now on, whatever happens, you don't carry it alone." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes steady. "I've let you suffer alone for too long. From now on, any burden we face it together." The next day, Michael and I went to the bank to settle the debt. The sum was not small, but when we walked out, I felt a strange lightness in my heart, not only because a debt had been erased, but because, for the first time, I knew I had truly stood with my daughter-in-law, not as a skeptic, not as a cold judge, but as family. When we returned home, I found Rachel sitting on the porch, her eyes still red but her lips curved into a faint, relieved smile. When she saw me, she rose, stepped forward, and wrapped her arms tightly around me. In that moment, I knew we had crossed a boundary I once thought we could never reach. When Michael and I came back from the bank, Rachel was already waiting at the door. The moment she saw us, she rushed over, her trembling hands clutching mine. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I thought I would spend my whole life believing no one would ever share the weight of my past. But today, you stood up for me, shielded me. You made me feel I truly have a family." I held her close, overcome with a strange, swelling emotion. Rachel, so small and frail in my arms, seemed once more a child in need of comfort. I stroked her hair gently and whispered, "You don't owe me anything. We are family, and family means we endure together. We rise together. You don't need to apologize, and you don't need to thank me." As the words left my lips, a memory rose up. My younger self, poor and desperate, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. I remembered a winter evening, snow falling thick outside, when I sat shivering in a cheap rented room, clutching my empty stomach as tears slid down my cheeks. And then my husband, Mr. Hayes, had come to me, offering a bowl of hot soup and saying, "From now on, you won't face this alone." That moment had saved me from despair. I understood what it meant to be pulled back from the edge. And today, when I stood to protect Rachel, I was simply doing what any woman of the family should, passing on the same shelter I once received. That evening, the three of us ate together. The silence lingered, but it no longer felt heavy. Michael placed extra food into Rachel's bowl, and Lucy chattered cheerfully about her school day. I looked around the table and saw in Rachel's eyes a new kind of faith, a belief that she was no longer Rebecca the orphan, but part of this home. The next day, when I met a few old friends at the church group, I did something I had never imagined myself doing. When they curiously asked about my daughter-in-law, I smiled, clasped Rachel's hand, and declared firmly, "This is not just my daughter-in-law. This is my daughter." I saw Rachel freeze, her eyes widening before filling with tears. She turned to me, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Mom." In that instant, I knew I had truly crossed the line from a suspicious mother-in-law into a second mother for Rachel. And Rachel knew too that she no longer had to bear the weight alone. But what I did not foresee was this. At the very moment I publicly claimed Rachel as my daughter, the shadow of her biological father rose again. Old legal documents resurfaced unexpectedly, threatening to drag us into a new storm. I once thought the storms had finally passed, but life is never so quick to let go. One morning, the postman delivered a thick stack of files, stamped with the red seal of the court. On the cover, the name Henry Green, Rachel's biological father, stood out like a ghost returning from the abyss. I sat frozen, my hands trembling as I flipped through the pages. The file detailed his arrests for abuse, witness statements from neighbors, even old medical records of Rachel as a child filled with bruises that could not be denied. When Rachel read those passages, her hands shook violently, lips pressed tight. I looked at my daughter-in-law and saw her small frame curling inward, as if she were being dragged back into those terrifying nights of long ago. But this time, I did not leave her alone. I gripped her hand firmly and said with all the strength I had, "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Now everything is in black and white. The law recognizes you as a victim. There are no more chains from the past." Michael sat beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. I saw my son, for the first time, free of anger, only love remained. He whispered into Rachel's ear, "You're free of him now. The past will never return. I'll protect you with Mom forever." The hearing itself was quiet, but the outcome carried the weight of final closure. The court confirmed Henry Green as an abuser who had abandoned his child, leaving behind debts that were unlawful. Those debts were nullified. Rachel was officially declared free, unconnected, untouchable by any legal claim. When the judge read the ruling, Rachel broke down in tears. Sitting behind her, I wept too. For years she had lived haunted, fearing that the past would knock at her door at any moment. Now, that door had been sealed shut, stamped by the undeniable authority of the law. That day, we brought Mrs. Green to the court. When she saw Rachel step outside, her eyes shining for the first time in months, the old woman clutched my hand, her voice trembling. "You see," she whispered, "at last she has a real family, and the protection I was never able to give her." I squeezed her hand, my chest tightening. "No, you were the one who saved her first. I only continued what you began." Rachel turned back and embraced us both. In that embrace, I knew the past was finally buried, not as a wound, but as proof of her strength and resilience. When we left the courthouse, we didn't rush home. Michael suggested we stop by a small diner near the church, ordering simple dishes, as if to chase away the heaviness that had clung to us for so many months. Rachel sat in the middle, her eyes still swollen but a fragile smile on her lips. Lucy doodled little pictures of our family on a napkin, carefree, as if no storm had ever swept through our lives. I looked over at Mrs. Green and saw her cheek tremble as Rachel gently placed food into her bowl. My heart tightened with an indescribable gratitude. I leaned over, wrapped my arm around her, and whispered, "From now on, let's both be Rachel's mothers. One mother alone could never heal wounds that deep." Mrs. Green burst into tears. clutching me with her frail, trembling shoulders. "Thank you. I've waited my whole life to hear those words. Now I can leave this world in peace when the time comes." Michael sat across from us, leaning back in his chair, his eyes shining for the first time after so many dark days. He exhaled deeply, his voice filled with relief. "At last, we're free. No more ghosts, no more debts, no more fear." Rachel reached out and clasped her husband's hand tightly. Her eyes gleamed with a newfound faith. In that moment, I knew the cracks had begun to mend, not perfectly, but enough for this family to stand firm again. That meal had no champagne, no jubilant music, only laughter mingled with tears. Yet to me, it was warmer than any grand banquet I had ever attended, because for the first time, I saw my daughter-in-law at ease, like a true daughter of the family. When we returned home, Rachel lingered on the porch for a long while. A crescent moon hung in the sky, its silver light spilling over her hair. I sat beside her, waiting in silence. At last, she turned to me, her eyes solemn yet radiant. "Mother, I've lived too long in the shadows. I want to change. I want to tell my story, not to complain or seek pity, but so other women, those who have suffered abuse, who are haunted by their pasts, will know they too can find freedom." I was startled, then slowly nodded. I understood. This was not only a brave decision, but Rachel's way of finally closing the door on her past. From running away, she now wished to stand tall, to become a voice for those who could not speak. I clasped my daughter-in-law's hand, or rather, my daughter's, and I knew the story was far from over. It had just turned to a new chapter, the journey of transforming pain into light for others. The following Sunday, Rachel arrived at church earlier than usual. Instead of quietly sitting at the back as she always did, today she walked toward the wooden pulpit where the pastor normally stood. Michael and I sat below, with little Lucy nestled between us, clutching her teddy bear. The room buzzed with murmurs as people noticed Rachel, the elementary school teacher, the daughter-in-law who rarely joined community gatherings, now choosing to stand before everyone. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with every word. "I once carried another name. I once lived in fear, believing my past would bury my future. But thanks to the hands that pulled me up, thanks to a family that refused to abandon me, I am able to stand here today." The hall fell silent. Many women lowered their heads. Some dabbed at their eyes. Rachel spoke about her childhood in the orphanage, the meaningless beatings from her father, the years of running, and the constant fear of being exposed. Yet instead of blame, she ended with hope. "The past is not a life sentence. We all have the right to step into the light, the right to build a new home even after losing everything." Sitting there, my heart quivered. For years I had judged, doubted, and resented my daughter-in-law. Yet today, watching her stand not as a woman bowed by silence, but as one who could lift her head before an entire community, I felt prouder than ever. When she finished, applause erupted throughout the room. Many women came forward to embrace Rachel, whispering that they too bore wounds, and that her words had made them feel less alone. That evening, when we gathered in the living room, Lucy brought out a sheet of paper filled with colors. She hung her drawing above the fireplace, for figures holding hands, with a crooked line of writing beneath. "Grandma, Dad, Mom, me." Rachel pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling. Michael bent down and kissed his daughter's hair, and I simply sat still, gazing at that childish sketch, realizing that sometimes happiness is no more than for scribbled figures, and a family willing to hold hands no matter what storms they've endured. Later that night, after Lucy had fallen asleep, we remained in the living room. The warm yellow light glowed over the wooden table, reflecting off the drawing she'd just pinned up. The messy yet meaningful lines seemed to wrap the room in an indescribable warmth. Michael sat quietly for a while, then turned to me. His voice caught, but his eyes were bright. "Mom, thank you. Without you, this family would have fallen apart long ago. I let anger blind me, but you kept us together, bit by bit. I owe you so much." I felt a flicker of surprise. My son, who so rarely spoke of his feelings, was today speaking straight from his heart. I laid my hand gently on his shoulder and smiled softly. "No, Michael, you were the one who dared to cry, who dared to hold your wife again. As for me, I only learned how to open my heart." Rachel sat beside us, silent but with tears brimming. She clasped my hand tightly, as if to offer thanks with a grip when words were no longer enough. The next day, Mrs. Green came by. When she saw the picture Lucy had hung, she stood for a long time in front of the fireplace. Then she smiled a gentle smile I had never seen before. Now she truly has a home, not just a roof over her head, but a place where her heart can rest. Hearing that, Rachel threw her arms around Mrs. Green and wept like a child. I stood nearby, my heart filling with a quiet gratitude. If it weren't for this silver-haired woman, Rachel might not have survived to see today when I walked her out. I lingered on the porch, gazing at the sunset sky awash in red. In that moment, I realized not only Rachel, not only Michael, but I myself had changed. From a strict mother-in-law who always judged and doubted, I had learned how to let go, how to listen. I had stopped searching for perfection in others and instead had begun to see the strength hidden in their cracks. I knew the journey was not yet over, but as I looked at Lucy's family drawing, I understood. Change did not come from Rachel alone, it also came from within me. And perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. That weekend, we decided to hold a cozy family dinner. It wasn't a holiday, nor did we need any grand reason, just the simple desire to sit together after months of storms. The table was set simply: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, Lucy's favorite vegetable soup, and an apple pie Rachel baked herself. The aroma filled the kitchen, making the whole house feel close-knit, peaceful in a way we hadn't felt in so long. Lucy chattered away between bites, telling us her teacher had praised her drawing and would pin it on the class board tomorrow. Michael smiled softly, serving her more chicken while sneaking glances at Rachel. And Rachel, for the first time in what felt like forever, sat relaxed, without wary eyes or trembling shoulders. After dinner, while we lingered around the table, Rachel turned to her daughter. Her voice was gentle, deliberate, as though each word carried weight. "Lucy, I want to tell you a story. Once, your mother was a little girl who was very afraid. I lived in a place where no one protected me, where I had to hide myself from scary things. But then, I met people who loved me. And most of all, I had you. Since I've had you, I haven't been afraid the way I once was." Lucy's big eyes fixed on her, quiet and intent. Then the little girl placed her small hand over Rachel's, whispering, "I'll always be with you. I promise." Rachel laughed through tears, but they were lighter tears this time, as though she had just shed an old, worn coat. Michael looked at his wife and daughter with tenderness glowing in his eyes. I sat nearby, silently watching. When Rachel lifted her gaze, our eyes met. No more distance, no more suspicion or doubt, only an unspoken understanding. A bond between two women who had once stood on opposite sides but had now become allies, under the same roof. But in that moment, I knew this family had truly found peace again. The meal lingered longer than usual. No one was in a hurry to leave the table, as though we all wanted to hold tight to that rare, warm moment of togetherness. When the plates were nearly empty, Michael suddenly raised his glass of apple cider, his eyes sweeping across us before resting on Rachel. "To a new beginning," he said, voice warm and steady. Rachel froze, eyes brimming, then lightly clinked her glass against his. Lucy, giggling, lifted her cup of milk, and I too raised mine. The joy that spread around the table felt like a soft breeze chasing away the long chill that had haunted this house. I looked around at the faces I loved. Rachel, the woman I had once seen as distant, secretive, even dangerous, now sat beside me, smiling with ease. Michael, my son, seemed more grown than ever, learning to forgive and love fully. And Lucy, with her clear, innocent eyes, was the string that bound us all together. A thought stirred within me. Misunderstandings aren't always the end. With enough patience, with listening instead of judging, they can transform into love, into an even stronger bond. After we finished tidying up, I stepped out onto the porch, gazing at the starry night sky. The crisp air washed over me, cleansing my heart. I thought of my late husband. If he were still here, he would surely smile, content that his family had weathered the storm and found their way back to safe harbor. That night, as I drifted into sleep, I heard faint rustling from the next room. Rachel was still awake. The light from her room spilled through the crack under the door. The next morning, passing by, I caught a glimpse of her open journal on the vanity. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "Margaret has forgiven me, that is the miracle." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I didn't need to read any further. Those few words alone were enough to blur my vision with tears. Gently, I closed the door, giving my daughter-in-law her private moment with those lines. And deep down, I knew the greatest miracle wasn't the court's verdict, nor the debts cleared away. It was the forgiveness and love that had taken root between us. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, only the sparrows chirping on the eaves. I stepped into the kitchen just as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window, painting golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. The back door swung open, and Lucy ran into the yard, her tangled hair glowing in the light. She darted about, laughter ringing like music announcing a new beginning. I stood at the threshold, warmth rising in my chest as I watched her inside. Rachel was making coffee. Steam curled from the kettle, carrying its familiar aroma through the room. When I sat down, she gently placed a steaming cup before me, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes soft. "Mom," she whispered, light as a breeze, yet it echoed in my heart like a bell. I looked up, meeting Rachel's glistening eyes. This time, there was no fear in them, no guarded distance, only trust and genuine kinship. I smiled, letting my hand rest on hers, feeling the warmth flow between us. In that moment, I realized our family was whole again. Not whole because it was perfect, but because we had walked through the wreckage, learned to forgive, and found one another again after all the misunderstandings. Sunlight poured into the yard where Lucy played, and Michael stepped out, lifting her high into the air as laughter filled the morning. Rachel looked on, a gentle smile curving her lips. I sat quietly, sipping my coffee, letting simple happiness spread through my chest. Bathed in that golden kitchen light, I thought back to a vow I had made long ago. When I first entered my husband's home, my mother-in-law was a harsh woman controlling every penny, every meal, every word I spoke. There were nights I wept in silence, promising myself, if I ever have a daughter-in-law, I will never become that kind of mother-in-law. And yet, somewhere along the way, I had strayed into that very shadow. I had doubted, scrutinized, always waiting for Rachel to stumble. It wasn't until everything broke open, until she wept before me, until her wounded childhood was laid bare, that I saw the truth. I had nearly become the very thing I once despised. But now, in this radiant morning, as my daughter-in-law called me Mom, I knew I had kept my promise after all. I had not let my heart turn to stone. I had learned to open it to love a woman who once changed her name just to survive. Rachel sat beside me, sipping her coffee in silence, her gaze drifting now and then to the yard where Michael and Lucy laughed together. Slowly, I spoke, my voice steady, as if I wanted to etch the words into all our hearts. A family is not built on perfection, but on forgiveness, on choosing to stand together after the storms. That is what makes us whole. Rachel, do you know, the true treasure of life is not money, nor fame. The real treasure is the people whose hands we hold as we walk through the storms. It took me many years to understand that. And today, looking at you, at Michael, at Lucy, I know this family is my treasure. Rachel turned to me, her eyes shimmering. She said nothing, only laid her small hand over mine and squeezed gently. That silence spoke louder than 100 promises. Outside, Lucy's laughter rang bright in the sunlight, clear as a string of silver bells. Michael chased after her across the dew-damp grass. Morning light wrapped them in a soft glow, like the picture I had always dreamed of, a home filled with love, forgiveness, and peace. I sat there, finishing the last sip of coffee, the bitter taste blending with the sweetness in my heart. I knew our family's story would continue. There would still be hard days. There would still be arguments. But above all, we had learned to rise from the rubble, to cherish one another while we were still here. The window stood open, letting in the morning breeze scented with fresh grass. I closed my eyes, letting serenity wash over me. In that moment, I whispered to myself, "This is happiness. Not perfect, but real." And then, once more, the sound of a child's laughter echoed across the yard, stretching on like an endless melody. The house was filled with peace. My dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, I invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts or your own experiences. And don't forget to subscribe, so we can continue to listen, to tell, and to live through stories together, stories that may be yours, or perhaps someone you once knew.